Previously, I've narrated chapters 1 through 3 of my book, Betrayal, Book 1, The Facility. Well, here today, we're going to continue that journey, chapters 4 through 5. Viewer discretion is advised. Strong language and graphic content. All writings. Narration is done by myself, Alexander Allen. Hi, that's me, aka Vet Duck. Where we last left off, our C-130 went down. The team had landed on a beach in the dark, right outside of the Amazon. Lieutenant Colonel Watson, fortunately, KIA. Colonel Blanche, Captain Rico are MIA. So I invite you now. Let's continue our adventure, shall we? With Chapter 4, Crash Site. We ventured into the jungle with hopes of finding Captain Rico and Colonel Blanche at the crash site. The jungle was very mysterious with lots of tall, thick, brown and green trees. Trees that were so tall they could block out all sunlight from getting through. The trees had long fangs hanging and wrapping around them. Some of them even looked like snakes. There were giant rocks and small rocks that ran along the riverbed deeper and deeper into the jungle. The jungle of the Amazon was beautiful during the day, I'm sure, but at night, it was pure hell. Mr. Taylor and Thompson covered the rear of the group while I led us towards the direction of the crash site. Even though we'd been walking just for a matter of minutes, I feel like we've been walking for hours in this dreadful shithole of a place. What the fuck's going on here, Taylor? That plane was shot down, and last time I checked, that wasn't part of the plan, whispered Thompson to Mr. Taylor in a slightly worried voice. Wish I knew what the hell to tell you, Thompson, but it's pretty damn obvious given the circumstances, don't you think? Whispered Mr. Taylor back to Thompson. Mr. Taylor pointed at everyone and then, with his left thumb, made a notion of slitting his throat. You mean to tell me that we're expendable as well? There's no fucking way. I mean, the general needs us. Doesn't he? Whispered Thompson back to Mr. Taylor with a concerned look on his face. Look, at all the signs, man. First off, those missiles knew exactly where we were going to be. Second, if the general disposes of us, then there's no one else to blackmail him or get in his way. It's a win-win, whispered Mr. Taylor back to Thompson. This is so fucked, whispered Thompson under his breath. Mr. Taylor walked up to the front of the group and began walking beside me with a bit of a worried look on his face. I looked over at Mr. Taylor and smiled. Turn that frown upside down and enjoy this nice, relaxing vacation, you crumpy old fuck, I said with a smile still on my face. This is no time for your stupid games, jackass. Now tell me, what do you make out of all this? Said Mr. Taylor, looking at me with anger in his eyes. I looked up into the sky as moonlight began to break through the top of the trees and raindrops began to fall onto us. Well, some fucking cocksucker shot us down, that I know for sure. I'm starting to wonder who did it, I said to Mr. Taylor as I took off my hat and let my hair get wet from the rain. Any ideas on who could have done it? Asked Mr. Taylor. I looked down from the sky and put my hat back on my head, then turned my focus to Mr. Taylor. The crash site could tell us more if some of the systems still work, which I doubt they do, but if I had to guess, I'd say we did it. I said to Mr. Taylor as I began to continue walking towards the crash site. We had walked for a good 3 or 4 hours, and the rain wasn't letting up at all. We were soaked, so soaked, I could barely keep a hold of my rifle, so I slung it on my back and encouraged everyone else to do the same, since there seemed to be no immediate threat. "This rain's a bitch!" yelled Thompson from the back of the group. "Suck it up, bitch tits. After all, you're the dumbass that chose this dick-sucking assignment," I yelled back to Thompson, who was looking pissed as all hell. "You better watch your tone with me, you ginger-looking motherfucker," yelled Thompson back to me with anger in his voice. Man, did I love pissing him off. I walked up to Thompson and met him at the back of the group face to face. "You see this freckle right here? It's new, you know why?" asked Thompson, followed by an awkward silence. "Because it's your soul, bitch tits," I said to Thompson, pointing out a freckle on my wrist. Thompson swung a right hook at me. I dunked and countered with an uppercut, also missing. Thompson threw another right hook, then a left, then a right again. I dodged them all and kicked him in the chest with my right boot, causing Thompson to stumble back a few steps. "Control yourselves now!" yelled Mr. Taylor. As I turned to see Mr. Taylor yelling at Thompson and I, Thompson ran over and tackled me. As Thompson and I fell to the wet, muddy ground of the jungle, we began to roll down a steep hill. On the way down the hill, Thompson and I hit many trees and rocks until we finally reached the bottom. Disoriented, I blinked my eyes, trying to regain my vision and stop my head from spinning. My ears were ringing due to hitting my head off the last tree at the bottom of the hill. I sat myself up and tried to gather my surroundings. To my right, I could hear the rest of the group coming down the hill after us. "Are you two dumb fucks okay? We're almost there, and fuck this up," yelled Staff Sergeant Packer. In front of me, I saw Thompson screaming and holding his right leg very tightly. There is a branch sticking out both sides of his leg with dark, rich blood just oozing out. Poor miserable fuck, I thought to myself, staring at Thompson. Almost to my feet now, I looked to my left and could see the crash site in the distance about 300 meters away. Mr. Taylor and the rest of the group made it down to the bottom of the hill and ran over to Thompson and I. "You alright, brother?" asked Sergeant First Class Martinez, while running over to me with worry in his voice. Yeah, I'm good. Go check on bitch tits over there," I said, pointing over at Thompson. "Go to hell, you son of a bitch!" yelled Thompson while holding his leg and rocking back and forth. "How bad is it?" I asked, trying to sound concerned for Thompson. Not like I really gave a flying fuck. "Well, he can't walk on his own. I'll stay here and patch this leg up while the rest of you go and investigate the crash site," said Mr. Taylor, taking a knee next to Thompson, looking at the branch in his right leg. "Be back in a bit," I said with a nod. It wasn't long before we reached the crash site and set up a 360-degree perimeter around it. "Packer on me. Everyone else stay and keep watch while we're searching for the plane and Captain Rico and Captain Blanche. Colonel Blanche." Started to run out of ink here. My apologies. I said to the group and pointing at Staff Sergeant Packer to follow me. We started our search at the rear of the C-130 Hercules and worked our way up to the cockpit. It was a mess. The wings were barely attached and the tail section of the aircraft was holding on by just a few steel bars. The cockpit itself looked like it was dug halfway into the ground. "Well, Rico's not here and neither is Colonel Blanche. But look at all this blood leading out of the cockpit to the side door. Looks like someone was dragged out of here, said the Staff Sergeant Packer, pointing at the trail of blood. Maybe it was Rico. Maybe you got here first and dragged him out, said Staff Sergeant Packer. No, this was someone or something else. Rico would have stayed here and waited for us, said the Staff Sergeant Packer as I turned to walk out of the aircraft. Mr. Taylor kneeled down next to Thompson's injured leg, pulled out his K-bar knife, and started to cut off the protruding ends of the branch. You just can't control that big ego of yours, can you? Said Mr. Taylor while he cut into the first side of the branch. Someone had to shut that cocky son of a bitch, said Thompson, clutching his teeth, trying to prevent himself from yelling at the immense amount of pain he felt in his leg. Yeah? Look at you now, tough guy. On the ground and can't even keep yourself up. Now someone has to carry your big dumb ass, or should I say, bitch tits, said Mr. Taylor as he cut off the other end of the branch. Mr. Taylor reached into Thompson's pack and opened up a field dressing, wrapped it around Thompson's leg, and tied it off. So what do you think we should do now? Asked Mr. Taylor, looking at Thompson with a concerned look on his face. Thompson sat himself up against a tree, grabbed his MK-14, and looked in the direction of the crash site. We should kill all those miserable fucks and call a chopper in to come and get us out of this hellhole, said Thompson, chambering around into his rifle. Don't you find it a bit odd, Thompson, that we were shot down at 40,000 feet when no one else knew we were coming? Said Mr. Taylor as he wiped Thompson's knife and onto his cargo pants. All the more reason to get rid of the Major and his team. Then we can focus on ourselves and dealing with the General, assuming he's the one that's behind all this, said Thompson, looking down at his rifle. Mr. Taylor leaned forward and placed his left hand on Thompson's right shoulder. You don't think we need the Major and his team? Asked Mr. Taylor, staring at Thompson. Thompson raised his rifle, looked down his scope, and aimed toward the crash site. If you don't do it, sir, I will, said Thompson, taking in a deep breath and placing his finger on the trigger. Well, that's too bad then, said Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor jammed his left knee into the wound on Thompson's right leg and lunged forward, gripping tightly around Thompson's throat with both hands. Thompson shoved the buttstock of his rifle into Mr. Taylor's right side, knocking Mr. Taylor to the ground. They'll kill us if we don't kill them first, yelled Thompson, pointing his rifle back towards the crash site. Mr. Taylor got off the ground and kicked Thompson hard in the right side of his head. Thompson's head smacked off of the tree and his rifle fell to his lap. You're not going to kill my son, said Mr. Taylor as he got on top of Thompson and began to choke him again. Thompson struggled to get a grip on his rifle and raise it up again. Why are you doing this? Your son will die one way or another, said Thompson with his face turning pale and eyes bloodshot. Thompson raised his rifle and with one hand pointing it towards the crash site, barely being able to see through the scope. Because he's my son. You don't get it, Thompson. He's all I have left in this shitty world of ours, and I'm not about to lose him too, said Mr. Taylor, squeezing harder. Thompson placed his finger on the trigger and began to squeeze. See you in hell, brother, said Mr. Taylor as he quickly placed his right hand on the back of Thompson's head and his left hand on Thompson's forehead. Bang! Thompson's rifle fired a shot off into the air as Mr. Taylor twisted Thompson's head, snapping his neck. Mr. Taylor got off of Thompson and leaned his back up against the tree, breathing heavily. We could have made it out this together. Why? Why couldn't you just listen to me? It doesn't have to be this way. Why wouldn't you just fucking listen? Mr. Taylor thought to himself as he reached over and ripped off one of Thompson's dog tags without looking at him. Staff Sergeant Packer and I walked out of the C-130 Hercules and called for the group to rally up on our location. So how do you want to set up the next search group? The blood trail ends at the door of the aircraft. We've got nothing to go on, said Staff Sergeant Packer. Bang! The sound of a shot coming from Thompson and Mr. Taylor's location. Everyone move now! I yelled as I pointed in the direction of Thompson and Mr. Taylor. When we got back to Thompson and Mr. Taylor's location, Mr. Taylor was up against a tree trying to catch his breath while Thompson's body lay limp up against the tree with bloodshot eyes and a large black and blue mark around his neck. What the fuck happened back here? I said, looking over at Mr. Taylor while Staff Sergeant Packer looked over Thompson. He's dead, Major, said Staff Sergeant Packer looking at me. What the hell happened here, Mr. Taylor? Axe kneeling down in front of Mr. Taylor, who looked like he just had his daily period since there was blood around the crotch of his pants. Mr. Taylor stood up and brushed the dirt off his clothes, then looked over at Thompson's limp body. Thompson became delusional due to heavy blood loss, and as a result, he tried to kill me. I had no other choice but to put him out of his misery, said Mr. Taylor, looking away from Thompson and at all of us. He didn't seem to be losing a lot of blood when we left to go investigate the crash site. What caused him to bleed out? Asked Staff Sergeant Packer, looking curiously at Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor reached down and picked up Thompson's rifle, which lay beside his body. It struck a nerve when I tried to secure his wounds, said Mr. Taylor, looking at Staff Sergeant Packer angrily. So what now, Mr. Taylor? I asked as I stepped in front of Staff Sergeant Packer. Mr. Taylor, looking in the direction of the crash site, and nodded. Did you find anyone down there? Asked Mr. Taylor, still staring in the direction of the crash site. Staff Sergeant Packer walked back over to Thompson's body and knelt down beside it. We found a trail of blood leading from the cockpit to one of the side doors. The blood trail ends there. I don't believe it was Captain Rico for the fact he would have stuck around for us to show up, I said, staring at Mr. Taylor, who was now watching Staff Sergeant Packer very closely. Mr. Taylor continued to stare at Staff Sergeant Packer as if he was in some sort of trance. Mr. Taylor, what would you suggest we do next? I said to Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor didn't respond to me and instead walked over and placed his left hand on Staff Sergeant Packer's right shoulder. He's dead. Just leave him be, said Mr. Taylor to Staff Sergeant Packer in a low tone. Staff Sergeant Packer looked Mr. Taylor dead in the face, stood up, and began walking back toward the rest of the men. I'm watching you, said Staff Sergeant Packer under his breath as he walked away. Mr. Taylor, what do you suggest we do now? Asked Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor shook his head and looked over at me. Let's go find our missing men, Major, said Mr. Taylor as he walked past me and headed towards the crash site. Staff Sergeant Packer ran up to me and gave me a concerned look. Are you just going to leave him here like this? Yelled Staff Sergeant Packer, looking over my shoulder at Mr. Taylor, who was walking toward the crash site. He's no use to me anymore. Besides, we don't have the time to waste to bury another dead man, yelled Mr. Taylor back to Staff Sergeant Packer. Staff Sergeant Packer looked at me with anger and sadness in his face. I reached into my right breast pocket and pulled out a lighter, flicked the top up, and handed it to Staff Sergeant Packer. Burn the body out of a sign of respect. I said as Staff Sergeant Packer took the lighter from me. I turned around and motioned for everyone else to follow me as I headed back towards the crash site. Staff Sergeant Packer walked over to Thompson's cold, limp, bloody dead body and sighed. Staff Sergeant Packer pulled out a flash from his left upper pants pocket, unscrewed the top, and poured out the contents all over Thompson's body. "Forgive me, brother," said Staff Sergeant Packer as he stood up and threw the lighter onto Thompson's chest, engulfing his entire body in flames. Chapter 5. A Traitor Among Us. When we made it back to the crash site, Mr. Taylor stopped and began shaking his head and placing his hands on his hips. Johnson, Lynn, and Rossetti walked up to Mr. Taylor and stood in a circle around him. Staff Sergeant Packer walked up beside me and gave me a little shove. "What do you think they're talking about? Maybe how Thompson was murdered?" asked Staff Sergeant Packer in a whisper. I looked at Staff Sergeant Packer with concern in my eyes. "What are you talking about? You don't think Taylor would have murdered his right-hand man, do you? I mean, what would cause him to do something like that?" asked Staff Sergeant Packer. Staff Sergeant Packer took me to the side out of view from everyone else, reached into his right cargo pocket, and pulled out a large piece of gauze which had some blood on it. I noticed this while I was examining Thompson's body. "Notice how it's not saturated in blood?" said Staff Sergeant Packer, pointing at the gauze. I grabbed the piece of gauze from Staff Sergeant Packer and looked it over. "What are you getting at? What does this piece of gauze have to do with anything?" I asked Staff Sergeant Packer as I looked around to see if anyone was watching us. Staff Sergeant Packer grabbed the gauze out of my hand and held it up to my face. "Taylor said that Thompson had become delusional because he lost too much blood. Yet, while bleeding out and struggling to fight off Taylor, the gauze isn't covered in blood. Don't you see, brother?" "Shit, someone's coming," said Staff Sergeant Packer. Staff Sergeant Packer shoved the gauze back into his pocket, and he and I began pointing in different directions as if to make it look like we were trying to decide on which way we should go to begin our search for Colonel Blanche and Captain Rico. "Hey, something's not right with Mr. Taylor. He seems to be talking to himself," said Staff Sergeant Deo, staring at Staff Sergeant Packer and I. We walked back over to the crash site and saw Sergeant First Class Martinez leaning up against the wreckage while Mr. Taylor and his men were still standing in a circle, now near the cockpit of the aircraft. I walked over to Sergeant First Class Martinez, took off my hat, and leaned up against the wreckage, sitting beside him. "Any idea what they're talking about?" Deo said Taylor's been talking to himself, I said to Sergeant First Class Martinez. Sergeant First Class Martinez reached into his upper left breast pocket, pulled out a cigar, lit it, took in a nice deep puff, and exhaled. "Honestly, brother, I don't have a fucking clue as to what's going on with this clusterfuck," said Sergeant First Class Martinez, staring over at Mr. Taylor and his men. "What I do know, however, and still can't figure out why, is what could have brought this bird down. No one but the U.S. government knew where we'd be, and if you look at that engine, you can see what looks like a shit ton of buckshot, which is usually the result from a SAM," said Sergeant First Class Martinez, pointing to the right engine. "So you think General Wallace ordered this bird to be shot down?" I asked Sergeant First Class Martinez as I scratched the top of my head. Sergeant First Class Martinez took another puff, exhaled, flicked away his cigar, and leaned off of the wreckage. "I told you he didn't give a fuck about us. and contractors are almost always expendable, so, said Sergeant First Class Martinez with a sigh. Mr. Taylor pulled out his sidearm and pointed it at Rossetti, which in turn had the rest of his men pulling out their sidearms and pointing them at Mr. Taylor. Whoa, 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 what the fuck is this shit? I yelled as we ran up to Mr. Taylor and his team. I pointed my rifle at Mr. Taylor, and my team followed up by pointing their rifles at Mr. Taylor's men. For about a good solid minute, no one said anything, not so much as even moving a muscle. Can one of you mental retards please tell me what the fuck this is all about? I asked with a bit of anger in my voice. Y'all tell you, this fucking traitor murdered Thompson, said Rossetti with a lot of anger. Told you, brother, said Staff Sergeant Packer, looking down his sights at Rossetti. That true, Taylor? If so, why'd you do it? X, looking down my sights at Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor tightened his grip on his sidearm and looked at Rossetti with a lot of anger in his eyes. There is no doubt in my mind that Mr. Taylor would pull the trigger even though it would end up with his own death as well. Don't you say a goddamn word, said Mr. Taylor to Rossetti. Rossetti looked at Mr. Taylor with much regret and anger. Perhaps another time then, sir, said Rossetti, lowering his sidearm. Mr. Taylor and the rest of us slowly lowered our weapons as well and came together, forming one group. I looked at Mr. Taylor and wondered why he would murder Thompson, but I knew better than to bring it up right now, so I let it go. So then, should we get back to searching for our guys, or should we play a few rounds of Russian roulette? I said to Mr. Taylor as I began to walk in the direction of the blood trail. We began walking in the direction that we hoped was the right direction that would lead us to finding Colonel Blanche and Captain Rico. Mr. Taylor and his men brought up the rear as my team and I led us through the dense, dark, humid jungle terrain. As we walked on through the jungle, I couldn't stop thinking about why General Wallace would want us dead, and what could have given Mr. Taylor a reason to kill Thompson. Thompson was Mr. Taylor's right-hand man, and to me, it seemed like they could have even been fuck buddies. So why'd he do it? General Wallace always seemed to be irritated and pissed off by my team and I, sure, but we always gave results and never failed a mission under his command. So why would he want us dead? We had walked for about 5 hours straight, and no one said a word. It was so quiet, you almost couldn't hear yourself breathe. Our feet were tired, throats were getting dry, and some of us could barely keep our eyes open. I never should keep looking, Major, but what do you say we take a break? Give maybe a few hours of rest, then start back on the trail. After all, it'll be easier to search for Colonel Blanche and Captain Rico when the sun's out a bit more, said Staff Sergeant Packer, standing right behind me. I stopped and made a circle above my head with my left pointer finger to signal the group to gather around me. We're going to take a break here for a few hours and get some rest, at least till we have more light. Sergeant First Class Martinez will take first watch, followed by Staff Sergeant Deo, Staff Sergeant Packer, and myself. Mr. Taylor, you should set up a watch rotation with your men as well, I said to the group, looking around at everyone. Everyone except for the first watch got settled in and drifted off to sleep, but I couldn't sleep and my life depended on it, for my mind was running at 100 miles an hour trying to make sense of this great-ass clusterfuck. This seriously isn't the way I had envisioned my vacation to the Amazon. Mr. Taylor leaned up against a tree with large, thick green vines wrapped all around it, and began sharpening his knife. Mr. Taylor looked like he had been hit by a bus. His face was flushed and sweaty, body shaking a little, and almost looked like he wanted to cry. If only I knew what was going through his head. The first shift was over, and Mr. Taylor and I were still awake. I stood up, walked over next to Mr. Taylor, and sat down, leaning my back up against the tree. Mr. Taylor was done sharpening his knife and was now staring blankly at his watch. I looked at my watch. It was 8:35 a.m. "You don't look so great," I said as I stared off into the direction of the sun. Mr. Taylor said nothing and continued to stare at his watch. Maybe he was drowning, a term used for sleeping with your eyes open. "Why'd you do it, Taylor? Why did you murder Thompson?" asked Mr. Taylor, looking over at him. Mr. Taylor closed his eyes and with his right hand motioned for me to go back to my spot. "We make it out of this, I'll tell you anything you want to know," said Mr. Taylor, pulling his hat over his eyes. I stood up and cracked back a good 2 or 3 times. "I'll hold you to that," I said as I began to walk back to my spot. I stopped and took a deep breath. "We may have to deal with a mutual employer when we get out of here," I said as I continued to my spot. Mr. Taylor lifted up his hat just enough to see his eyes. "Seems that way," said Mr. Taylor, pulling his hat back down. I sat back down on my spot and closed my eyes, finally drifting off to sleep. "Marcus, wake up. Wake up, Marcus. Wake up," whispered Staff Sergeant Packer as he knelt down beside me, looking spooked as he began to nudge me. I opened my eyes and looked around. It had become dark again and extremely windy. You woke me up because of a fucking storm?" asked Staff Sergeant Packer with a weird look in my eyes. Staff Sergeant Packer looked at me and slapped me right across the right side of my face with his left hand. "No, you dumb fuck. You know me better than that. I woke you up because we're not alone anymore," said Staff Sergeant Packer, placing his right hand on my left shoulder and pointing out in the distance with his left. I grabbed my rifle, turned on the night vision setting on my scope, and looked through it. "I don't see anything, brother," I said as I continued to look around in the area Staff Sergeant Packer had pointed out to me. Staff Sergeant Packer looked through his scope and scanned the area in front of us. 200 meters out just below the vines. Do you see it?" asked Staff Sergeant Packer. I looked at the area Staff Sergeant Packer identified to me and could make out a figure that looked to be human, but wasn't one of our men. "Wake up everyone quietly and quickly. Set up a perimeter," I whispered to Staff Sergeant Packer, keeping my eyes on the figure. Staff Sergeant Packer began going around waking everyone and explaining to them that we were being watched and to move quietly and quickly. While Staff Sergeant Packer went around waking everyone up and informing them of the situation, I began to scan more of the area through my scope to see if I could figure out exactly what it was we were dealing with. Once Staff Sergeant Packer had finished waking everyone up, he had them pull 360 security just like we did back at the crash site. "Psst. Hey Marcus, what do you see?" asked Mr. Taylor, who had taken up a prone firing position next to the tree I was sleeping at. I continued to scan the area through my scope, stopping every so often at the spot Staff Sergeant Packer had first pointed out to me. "We're being watched. I count at least 3. No sign of weapons," I said to Mr. Taylor, never taking my eye away from the scope. Packer stayed low and made his way back up to my position. "No sign of weapons? Maybe it's the local tribe trying to figure out if we taste good." said Staff Sergeant Packer, now looking through his scope. Mr. Taylor took off his hat and wringed it out. Where the hell this damn storm come from? First it was getting sunny, and now it's dark and windy as fuck, said Mr. Taylor, putting his hat back on. I reached for the emergency strobe beacon on my vest, pulled it off, and handed it to Staff Sergeant Packer. What the hell do you want me to do with this? Blind them to death? Asked Staff Sergeant Packer sarcastically as he grabbed the beacon out of my hand. I took my eye off my scope and looked over at Staff Sergeant Packer with a smile. No, I want you to turn it on, point it in their direction, and chase them with it, I said to Staff Sergeant Packer, crossing my eyes. Staff Sergeant Packer looked at me with disappointment in his eyes, slung his rifle, and turned on the beacon. You've done some stupid-ass shit before in the past, but this is just fucking crazy, said Staff Sergeant Packer. Staff Sergeant Packer took in a deep breath and looked at the direction he had pointed out. Fuck this shit! Yelled Staff Sergeant Packer as he took off running towards the area he had pointed out. Mr. Taylor got up and stood right beside me. What the fuck is he doing? Is he fucking stupid? Asked Mr. Taylor, watching Staff Sergeant Packer chase after the figures while pointing the beacon at them. I stood up and looked over at Mr. Taylor. To be honest, Taylor, I didn't actually think he'd do it, I said to Mr. Taylor, laughing a bit. Let's go get our guy, I said to Mr. Taylor as we all began to run after Staff Sergeant Packer deeper and deeper into the jungle. We ran for about a good mile before catching up with Staff Sergeant Packer, who for some reason just stopped running. I walked up to Staff Sergeant Packer and nudged him in his right shoulder. What the fuck, Forrest Dump? You run out of gas or something? Shit, we've only gone a mile. And you let... Wow. What happened? Did you let them outrun your skinny white ass? Asked Staff Sergeant Packer, laughing and trying to catch my breath. Staff Sergeant Packer shoved me and pointed in 3 different directions. Whoever the hell they are, they're fast as shit. I ran up here, then they all split up in 3 directions, said Staff Sergeant Packer, leaning over with his hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. Mr. Taylor ran up to us and had this look of exhaustion on his face, and I thought contractors were supposed to be all fit and shit. Mr. Taylor was sweating so bad you would have thought he'd just come back from a gangbang, and he was definitely the bitch. Mr. Taylor put his left hand up in the air and crouched over, vomiting all over his boots. What's the matter, Grandpa? Can't hold down all the semen? I said as sarcastically as possible. You watch your tone with me, Major. Shit's not funny, said Mr. Taylor while wiping his mouth. Should we just keep going straight? We're bound to run into at least one of them, asked Staff Sergeant Packer, scanning the area with a scope. The storm started to pick up as the wind and rain increased heavily. So heavily that it almost looked like some of the trees could just snap right apart. Shall we? Asked Mr. Taylor as I pointed in front of us. Mr. Taylor nodded his head, and we began to walk in the direction of the figure who kept running in front of us. Now, I know I said that this was going to be chapters 4 through 5, but I can't leave you all here. I just can't. So we're going to continue on because it's about to get very interesting. So, without further ado, Chapter 6, POW. After walking for about a half hour, we could see the sky starting to get better as the rain slowed down. The wind let up, and the sun began to shine through the clouds. Mr. Taylor's men looked exhausted, and so did mine, as we kept searching for Colonel Blanche and Captain Rico. Our feet were aching, hands were becoming numb and dry, eyes weak and heavy, and faces covered in sweat. It was definitely a long-ass day for us all. We walked for about another 30 minutes before Staff Sergeant Packer stopped again. I walked up to Staff Sergeant Packer and handed him a rag from out of my right cargo pocket. He wiped off his face and handed it back to me as he began to scan in front of him with a scope. "Look there, about 300 meters out, 12 o'clock front," said Staff Sergeant Packer as he snapped his fingers at me with his left hand and taken a knee. I raised my rifle and took a look through my scope at the area Staff Sergeant Packer called out. About 300 meters in front of us were people standing about 5'5" and weighing about 135, if I had to guess, just standing there staring in our direction. Staff Sergeant Dale walked up beside Staff Sergeant Packer and I as he wiped the sweat from his forehead with a bandana. "What are the odds that the reason they're waiting for us is because they know where Captain Rico and Colonel Blanche are?" asked Staff Sergeant Dale, looking at Staff Sergeant Packer and I. "Well, 50% that's true, but there's also a 50% chance that they're going to kill us and most likely eat us," I replied to Staff Sergeant Dale, while I continued to watch them through my scope. Sergeant First Class Martinez walked up next to me, pulled out his knife, and began picking away at the dirt that was embedded underneath his fingernails. "We can always send Packer by himself, with salt in one hand and pepper in the other. Watch their reaction and go from there," said Sergeant First Class Martinez with a slight grin on his face. "You people are fucking animals," said Mr. Taylor, walking past Sergeant First Class Martinez with disgust on his face. I looked around at my team and chuckled. "Last time I checked, I wasn't a goat fucker," I said, taking my left hand and using it in a jerking manner towards Mr. Taylor. "I can't wait to get the fuck out of here. All you disgust me," said Mr. Taylor, looking around at my team. "Hey, they're running again," said Staff Sergeant Packer, pointing in their direction. We all started running after them as fast as we could. The whole damn chase was starting to seem like a game of cat and mouse, and we were the mouse. 3 minutes later, and we were back at the spot where we had last saw them. We lost them again. "Can we just fucking shoot one next time we see them again?" asked Rossetti, who sounded like he was about to fall over and die. $20 I bet you can't shoot one of them in their left nut," I said to Rossetti as I patted him on the back. Out of nowhere, a stick came flying through the air and hit me on the head. "What the fuck, man?" I yelled as I picked up the stick and threw it back. We raised our rifles and began slowly walking in the direction the stick came from. A fucking stick, can you believe that shit? I at least would have expected a damn rock, if anything. Hell, even shit. Fucking tribe-ass little son of bitches. "They have sticks and we have guns. What's the worst that could happen?" said Staff Sergeant Packer. Just then we heard it. The sound of twigs snapping. "Oh shit!" we all yelled as we fell into a trap hole that was about 12 feet deep, 12 feet wide, and 10 feet across. Productive little fucks, aren't they? I looked over at Packer and looked up at the opening of the hole. Well, that could happen. That could definitely happen, I said, pointing up and staring at Staff Sergeant Packer. I stood up and dusted myself off, looking up at the hole entrance. Everyone alright? No broken bones? No bleeding? I asked everyone. Everyone stood up, dusted themselves off, and checked their equipment, their rifles and etc. Don't be a perv. Everyone seemed to be alright besides some back pain and a few headaches. The rifles, on the other hand, somehow ended up getting stuck outside the hole. What a shitfest. Above us we could hear a lot of movement and chatter being made around the hole. Hey, you little shit fuckers! When I get out of this godforsaken hole, I'm going to cut all your heads off and display them for everyone to see, yelled Mr. Taylor, trying to get the attention of whoever was above us. The three little men we had been chasing after came over to the edge of the hole and looked down at us, laughing. You think this is real funny, huh? You're so fucking dead when I get out of here, said Mr. Taylor, looking up at the three little men. Two of the little men stuck their tongues out at Mr. Taylor, while the other one pulled out his penis and started pissing on Mr. Taylor. I myself found this quite amusing. Lynn pulled out his K-bar knife and threw it at the little man who was pissing on Mr. Taylor. The little man grabbed the knife in midair and threw it back at Lynn. The knife hit Lynn in the chest with such an amount of force that you could literally hear his ribs break. Lynn fell back up against the wall of the hole and slowly fell to the floor into his sitting position, slouched over with a knife sticking out of his chest. Staff Sergeant Packer rushed over to Lynn and checked for breathing and a pulse, while the rest of us pulled out our sidearms and aimed them at the three little men. The three little men ran off before any one of us could get off a shot. Staff Sergeant Packer removed Lynn's vest and shirt by cutting around the knife to see how bad the wound was, since he couldn't hear breathing or feel a pulse. Talk to me, Packer. How's he doing? Asked Mr. Taylor. The knife went right into his heart and hit with such force that it broke 3 ribs and severed his spine. There's nothing I can do. I'm sorry, said Staff Sergeant Packer as he closed Lynn's eyes. Mr. Taylor looked at Lynn's limp, cold, bloody dead body, then looked at us. These little fuckers are going to pay for what they've done. Now let's form a ladder and get the fuck out of this hole before those little pricks come back and try to kill the rest of us, said Mr. Taylor with anger in his voice. We formed a human ladder and helped one another out of the hole, one by one. Didn't see this coming, I said as I climbed out of the hole. Surrounding the hole must have been 50 to 60 men, much larger than the 3 little men we chased, with rifles just like ours. I think we're going to need a better plan, I said to Mr. Taylor as I stared at these men who ranged from 6'5" to 6'9", weighing from 330 pounds to 480 pounds. We all formed a circle facing outward and placing our hands on our sidearms. So, if anyone has any ideas, now would be the time to bring it up, I said to the group, hoping at least one of us would have something in mind. A group of giant men formed a pathway for another giant man who had a very large red beard and one blind eye. He walked slowly, but carried himself high, shoulders back, chest out, and chin up. He walked up about 5 feet. He walked up about 5 feet, 10 feet in front of us, and stopped. I am the great Chief Turo, of the Night Shadow tribe. You have started a war against my people. You are now our prisoners. Disobey me and die, said Chief Toru. Chief Toru waved on his men and walked back down the path. This concludes chapters 4 through 6. What is to come, you'll have to stick around and see. But I hope you're enjoying the book so far. I know I have enjoyed bringing it to life to all of you. Where's Colonel Blanche? Where's Captain Rico? Who are these men? Why are they so large? And as someone has said, what the hell is going on here?